All right, welcome to a tutorial on reusable animations. So Flutter has a really amazing animation package for us to use to do things like changing colors and rotating and translating and all sorts of stuff like that. And I'm going to go over a couple examples that are shown here. So this one's just a rotation that repeats indefinitely, and this is a color pulse which bounces in and then back out. And both of them run in cycles indefinitely. So the goal with this is to make animations that are reusable and make them into a component. So that you can wrap a different widget with that and then change its color, right? So this isn't just a single color pulse button that can only be a button. It can only say color pulse, right? It's a widget that's like a wrapper that we're going to be able to put on anything. And same with the translate one. So that's the idea with reusable animations. So first, going to go over the animation page in the Flutter Docs and just go over. They have a giant flowchart there with some helpful stuff, and then go over these two specific examples with the spinning animation and the color pulse animation. Okay, so let's first pull up the docs here, so the development on the animations. And basically there's an awful lot of different approaches you can take with how complex and how difficult something's going to be to animate. And often things are already built in for you, and it's going to make it an awful lot easier to use those. So they have this giant flowchart here that we don't really need to look at in detail, but the too long didn't read version is if there's something built in, you should use it, and it's going to be a lot easier. And it's also probably going to be a lot more performant. If there's not any of that stuff, you might need to use Custom Painter for really, really specific animations. I've actually never done this, but I have used animation controllers, and we're going to go over how to use an animation controller to make a fairly custom animation, which is the color pulse. That there really doesn't seem to be a good built-in way to do that. Okay, so let's pop into the code here. And first, let's look at main. So main just has a very simple one-page app. It's got the app and the scaffold. And there's just the two examples of our components. There's the color pulse animation on the floating action button, and then the spin animation on this little icon here. So yeah, you can see that I built these into components that have inputs, and I could wrap whatever I want in here to make this color pulse animation and the spin animation reusable. Use it anywhere else in my app if I wanted to. Okay, so first let's look at the spin one. I think the spin one is slightly simpler. So the spin animation is a widget, and it's got to be stateful, and we're going to see why in a sec. So the first thing it needs is a child, and then there's just some other inputs to control the animation, because we're going to basically make a wrapper for the animation, and we're trying to make it easier to consume, because we don't want to make every single widget in our app need to declare an animation controller if we can make just this one kind of wrapper for it. So the options you can say is forwards or backwards. The curve, in this case, the default's to linear, so that it just spins properly, like not bouncing around or anything like that. I think that makes the most sense for spinning. Of course, you could change it. And then the duration is 2 seconds for a full circle. So the reason it needs to be a stateful widget is because we need access to this ticker provider state mixin. And what that allows us to do is make an animation controller. Animation controller needs to be late final because it needs access to this, and vsync you're just going to put this, and because this has this mix-in, then this just works. And the animation controller also needs the duration, which is passed in from the widget there. So if you want your animation to repeat and cycle, then you also need to tell it to repeat with this dot dot to return this, and you're just going to call repeat. And then you have the option when you repeat it, whether or not it undoes itself or it goes forward again. So in this case, it goes forward again. It's not reversing, so it goes in a circle like this. If we put reverse true, it would do the full circle and then like unwind itself, which I think looks great for the color pulse, but for this case, doesn't make as much sense. Here we just have a multiplier for -1 or 1, depending on what direction we want to go. And that's used here in the current radians. So this widget uses an animated builder, which is a built-in widget from Material, and it's got some really easy stuff to really easy API. We just need to pass it a controller and then a builder, and then it's going to animate our stuff. We also got to pass in a child, which is a little confusing. I'll get more on that later. Let's first just explain the current radians, because that's up here. So our controller.value is a double that is going to change over time, right? And what we're going to do is just multiply that by 2 pi to change that into radians. And then maybe we want to multiply it by -1 to make it spin the other way. So that's how we get our radians. We're going to pass it into transform.rotate up here in the builder. So the builder has a child, and it also needs a child for the animated builder down here. And this is a little bit weird, but it's for performance. So the idea is that your child might have a widget subtree that doesn't actually need to be rebuilt every single frame. But yeah, don't put an icon there. Pass in the child and use it in the builder here. And we can see in transform.rotate with the current radians in the controller. Just makes that nice animation like there. Now we can see how we call it to create it. So it's a wrapper, like a widget that takes a builder. So this, it's the centered icon. So the icon icons.refresh, and reverse is false, and we can make it go the other way if we wanted to. It defaults to false, but I just have this here for no good reason. But yeah, I think this is a good thing that you could use for something like a loading indicator if you want it to spin. There are some plugins that have really nice animations already made for you though, so you might not want to make these things from scratch. A lot of animation in Flutter is just not reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of stuff that's already built from the material library and other plugins, so be a little cautious before you implement things from scratch, but some things you'll need to. And one of the things that I found that I needed to build from scratch was this color pulse animation. So for some reason, there is like a color tween builder, and you can make something go from one color to another, but there's no obvious way with the Flutter library to make it repeat or to make it bounce out of itself or do anything custom like that. So for that, we're going to need a controller again, and there's nothing super built in for that. But it's important to think about that first. Like, is there an animated widget that's going to help with this, and can we get a lot more out of the box from Flutter before we make something from scratch? But this widget is, it's not too complicated, even though it's got its own controller just like the other one. So it's a color pulse animation, and it's a widget, and we need a start and an end color. The end color is nullable, and we'll see what it does with an null end color in a second here. And then optionally, you can pass it a duration, just like the other one. And this one needs a builder. And this one is going to be less performant than the other. We're going to see why in a second. But colored widget builder is this widget function that I put here just to make it so that my functions are easier to pass around and more explicit. I put a type def here. It's a function that returns you a widget. It needs a context and a color, and this is a similar pattern to other builders that you've seen in material widgets that need to return a widget. They usually define these with a type def, and I think that's a good idea. Okay, so let's go to the state. So the same thing, we're going to have an animation controller, and we're going to need this single ticker provider state mix in so that we can put vsync this in here, put the duration just like the last one. This one we are going to reverse, so it basically bounces in and then bounces out. The end color, I've made it so that it either uses the end color that you provide, or it just oscillates with this opacity. So it's like an animated opacity. If you don't want to pass in that other color, basically it just looks like a shimmer. There is a widget that already does this for you, which is animated opacity. So don't do this if that's all you want to do. There is a widget there, but just making it optional just because, why not? It's a good example. Okay, so for this one we need a color tween, and a color tween has a begin and an end, and they're both colors. And what this is going to do is it's going to tell your controller where your begin and end points are, and it's going to be able to take in a value in an animation here, the curved animation, and say, well, now you're going to animate between these colors, and it's going to do all of the math or whatever it does to say, given this curve, which is bounce in, out, how do I go from some green to blue? And it's going to do that for you, make it nice and easy there. But it does need this controller, and this needs to be late, and this needs to be late because it's referencing things inside of this class. Late final is the best way to do that. You can also put them in init state if you want, but now that late is a new keyword, I think this is a little better. Okay, so now that we've got our color animation and our controller, we're going to have to add this listener here to build the screen every single time the color changes. And calling set state on every single frame is not super performant, and it's going to rebuild everything in that builder every single frame. So you got to be a little cautious when you're doing things like this. This is not very performant. So if you're going to do this 100 places on your screen and they have complicated widget trees under them, this could lag, and you might need to use things like Flutter Performance or the Profiler to see if it's actually costing you, making your frames take too long to render, and it's going to feel laggy. One thing on lag that I forgot to mention is that animations look terrible in debug mode. If you want to look at how your animation is actually going to look, you need to go flutter run -- release to see the actual version without that release flag, or else it's just going to look choppy and terrible. So yeah, this is a bit of a warning here. We're doing this. I have not found a better way to do this yet, which is unfortunate, but you've got to do what you got to do if you want to make this particular animation, I guess. So then we just dispose that controller here. But the build method is super simple. So we're just going to get the current color out of the animation. So this animation.value, as it animates, it's going to change that color for us. It could be null, and if it's null, we're just going to pass that start color. I'm actually not sure in what case it's null, but having this as the start off color, as the start color, seems to look just fine. And then we just pass forward that builder function that we passed in, so we can build whatever widget we're told to based on that color. So let's look at how that works in main here. So here we have the color pulse animation. We're starting with blue and we're ending with teal. And then we have this builder of context and color, and we're making this floating action button with the label. The foreground color is white, and the background color is the color that comes from our animator. And then it's just got this label, and it doesn't do anything. Because yeah, it's just a tutorial on animations. Hope you enjoyed. When you do it with this sort of thing, with these wrappers, you get a lot for free, like the animation for the what's it called, Inkwell, still works even though it's animating with color, which is really cool. So I think Flutter's animation tools are really powerful and really great, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.